My name is Emma. I'm 24, and for as long as I can remember, my family has treated me like their personal entertainment. Every gathering, every dinner, every supposedly happy occasion has been another opportunity for them to remind me that I don't quite measure up to their expectations. But before I tell you this complete story of how I finally turned the tables on them, tell me, where are you experiencing this story from? Are you listening while commuting, relaxing at home, or maybe taking a break from your own family drama? Whatever brought you here, if you enjoy stories of standing up to toxic family dynamics, make sure to like and subscribe for more real-life stories of people finding their strength. It started small, the way these things always do. My stepfather David would make little comments about my weight at family dinners. My step-aunt Monica, his sister, would wrap her cruelty in fake concern, asking if I was feeling overwhelmed by life whenever I didn't laugh at their jokes about me. My mother Sarah would sit there, occasionally nodding along, more concerned about keeping the peace than protecting her own daughter. And then there was my step-cousin Jake, Monica's precious 28-year-old son, who still lived in her basement but somehow was treated like he walked on water. Growing up in Denver with this family felt like being the star of a show I never auditioned for, the comedy relief who was always the punchline, never in on the joke. Every family barbecue at David and Sarah's house in the suburbs became a performance where I had to prove I deserved to be there. I'd arrive early, help set up, bring homemade desserts, and somehow still end up being the one they criticized when something went wrong. The day everything changed started like any other summer gathering. It was supposed to be a casual Sunday barbecue at my parents' house in Lakewood. The usual crowd was there, David manning the grill with his world's best cook apron, Monica holding court at the patio table with her designer sunglasses, Jake sprawled in a lawn chair scrolling through his phone while everyone else worked. I'd brought my famous chocolate chip cookies and had already spent an hour helping Sarah arrange fruit salads and set up the outdoor buffet table. The Colorado heat was particularly brutal that day, and I'd been running back and forth between the kitchen and backyard, carrying heavy platters and pitchers of iced tea. I started feeling lightheaded around noon, but I pushed through it, thinking I just needed to drink more water. That's when the chest tightness began, a strange, constricting feeling like someone was slowly tightening a belt around my ribcage. I tried to ignore it, forcing myself to keep moving, keep helping, keep playing the role of the dutiful daughter who earned her place at the table through service. But when I finally leaned against the kitchen counter to catch my breath, David's voice cut through my haze like a knife. "Stop being dramatic, Emma," he snapped from the doorway, his beer in one hand and that familiar look of irritation on his face. "We've still got dishes to wash and the yard to clean up. You're not getting out of work that easily." Before I could explain that I genuinely felt unwell, Monica chimed in from behind him, her voice dripping with that particular brand of condescension she'd perfected over the years. "Oh, please, Emma. You've been pulling this I don't feel good act since you were 12. Some of us actually have real problems." Her words hit like a physical blow, but before I could defend myself, another wave of dizziness crashed over me. My vision started to blur around the edges, and I had to grip the counter harder to keep from swaying. My breathing became shallow and rapid, each inhale feeling like I was trying to breathe through a straw. I really can't," I tried to say, but my voice came out weak and strained. "Oh, for crying out loud," David muttered, rolling his eyes. "Fine, go sit down for 5 minutes. But don't think this means you're done helping." I attempted to walk toward the living room, but halfway there, my legs gave out. I caught myself against the wall, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. That's when Jake looked up from his phone with that smirk I'd grown to hate. "Wow, Em, you should have gone to drama school," he said with a laugh. "This performance deserves an Oscar." I wanted to scream at them, to make them understand that this wasn't an act, but my chest felt like it was being crushed from the inside. Cold sweat beaded on my forehead as panic set in, not the emotional kind, but the physical, unstoppable kind that takes over your entire body. That's when Sarah finally stood up and started to say something, but someone had already called 911. I don't even know who. Maybe a neighbor heard the commotion. All I remember is the paramedic's calm voice cutting through the chaos, asking me questions I could barely answer through my labored breathing. The look on my family's faces when the EMT immediately called for a stretcher will stay with me forever. It was the moment they realized their dramatic daughter might actually be dying right in front of them. The ambulance ride to Presbyterian/St. Joseph Hospital felt like it lasted forever, and no time at all. The paramedic kept talking to me in that steady, professional voice that became my anchor as my world spun out of control. He adjusted the oxygen mask over my face and told me to focus on my breathing, that they were taking good care of me. His calm confidence was the only thing keeping me from completely falling apart. In the background of my medical crisis, I could hear the echo of my family's voices. David's annoyed muttering, Monica's fake concern, Jake's dismissive laughter. Even as I struggled to breathe, even as the EMT worked to stabilize me, they were still treating this like some elaborate performance I was putting on for attention. The emergency room at Presbyterian was a blur of bright lights and urgent voices. Nurses moved around me with practiced efficiency while doctors asked rapid-fire questions about my symptoms, my medical history, what I'd eaten that day. I tried to answer as best I could between the oxygen treatments, but everything felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life unfold on a television screen. It wasn't until they got my breathing stabilized and ran a series of tests that Dr. Martinez, a kind woman in her 40s with gentle eyes, sat down beside my bed with a serious expression. "Emma, you've had a severe allergic reaction," she explained, her voice clear and direct. "Your airway was closing, and your blood pressure dropped dangerously low. This wasn't anxiety or stress. This was anaphylaxis, and it could have been fatal if you hadn't gotten help when you did." The word fatal hit me like a physical blow. I stared at her, trying to process what she was telling me. All those times my family had accused me of being dramatic, of faking illness for attention, and I'd actually been having a life-threatening medical emergency. "We're going to keep you overnight for observation," Dr. Martinez continued, "and I'm prescribing you an EpiPen that you should carry with you at all times. We'll also need to do more comprehensive allergy testing to figure out exactly what triggered this reaction." That's when I noticed David standing in the doorway of my hospital room, looking uncomfortable in the sterile environment. Monica was behind him, clutching her purse like it was a shield, and Sarah hovered near the window, staring out at the Denver skyline instead of looking at me. Jake, predictably, was nowhere to be seen. Apparently, he decided to go home because there was nothing he could do here. "So she's fine then?" David asked Dr. Martinez in the same tone he'd used to ask about the weather. The doctor's expression shifted slightly, and I could see her taking in the family dynamic with the sharp awareness that medical professionals develop over years of dealing with all kinds of people. "No, Mr. Thompson," she replied firmly. "Emma is not fine. She nearly died today. This was a severe, life-threatening allergic reaction that required immediate medical intervention." She looked directly at David, then at Monica. The symptoms she was experiencing, the difficulty breathing, the chest pain, the dizziness, these weren't something she could control or fake. Her body was shutting down. I watched David's face as the doctor spoke, looking for some sign of remorse or concern. Instead, I saw that familiar stubborn set to his jaw that meant he was annoyed at being corrected. Monica just nodded politely, but I could tell from her expression that she was already mentally reframing the situation to make herself look better. "Well, it's not like we're doctors," Monica said with a little laugh that sounded forced. "How were we supposed to know it was serious? She's always been sensitive about these things." Dr. Martinez's eyes narrowed slightly. "There's a difference between being sensitive and having a medical emergency. Emma could have died if the paramedics had arrived even 10 minutes later." Her voice carried the weight of someone who had seen too many preventable tragedies. "I hope you'll take this seriously going forward." After the doctor left, an uncomfortable silence settled over the room. Sarah finally spoke up, her voice small and uncertain. "Emma, honey, are you okay? Do you need anything?" It was the first time all day that anyone in my family had actually asked how I was feeling, and the irony wasn't lost on me. I was lying in a hospital bed with an IV in my arm, having just learned that I'd nearly died, and now they were ready to show concern. I'm tired, I said simply, not trusting myself to say more without breaking down completely. David shifted his weight from foot to foot. Look, Emma, we didn't know it was. We thought you were just. He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. For the first time in my memory, David seemed at a loss for words. You thought I was just what? I asked quietly. Just faking it? Just being dramatic? Just trying to get out of doing dishes? Monica jumped in quickly, her voice taking on that syrupy tone she used when she was trying to smooth things over. We just thought you needed to push through it, sweetheart. Sometimes when we baby ourselves too much, we make things worse than they need to be. I stared at her, amazed that even now, even after a doctor had explicitly told them I could have died, she was still trying to make this somehow my fault. Still trying to make it seem like my near-death experience was a character flaw. The doctor just told you I almost died, I said, my voice stronger now. And you're still talking about babying myself? The room fell silent again. Sarah cleared her throat. Well, the important thing is that you're okay now, she said, clearly desperate to move past the uncomfortable conversation. But I wasn't okay. Physically, yes, I would recover. But something fundamental had shifted in that hospital room. For years, I'd internalized their criticism, wondering if maybe I was too sensitive, maybe I did overreact to things. But lying in that bed, hearing Dr. Martinez explain how close I'd come to dying while my family dismissed it as another one of my episodes, I finally saw the situation clearly. They left that evening after visiting hours ended, promising to come back in the morning. But when morning came, only Sarah showed up, and only to drive me home because the hospital required a family member to pick me up. David was busy at work. Monica had prior commitments, and Jake didn't even respond to the messages about my discharge. As Sarah drove me back to my apartment in silence, I stared out the window at the familiar streets of Denver and felt something cold and hard settling in my chest. Not the physical tightness from the allergic reaction, but something else entirely. The slow death of whatever naive hope I'd been holding on to, that my family might actually care about me. When I got home, there was already a text waiting from David. Glad you're feeling better. Don't forget about Monica's birthday dinner next weekend. Try not to eat anything that doesn't agree with you. LOL. LOL. He'd actually put LOL at the end of a message about my near-death experience. That's when I knew nothing was going to change. They weren't going to apologize. They weren't going to treat me differently. And they certainly weren't going to stop seeing me as their personal entertainment. If anything, they'd probably find ways to make jokes about my dramatic medical emergency at future gatherings. But as I sat in my quiet apartment, still weak from the ordeal, I realized something else. I didn't have to keep showing up for their performances anymore. The days following my hospital stay passed in a strange, hollow quiet. I called in sick to my job at the marketing firm downtown, spending most of my time in my small Capitol Hill apartment, trying to process what had happened. The EpiPen Dr. Martinez had prescribed sat on my coffee table like a constant reminder of how close I'd come to dying, and how little my own family had cared. I kept replaying David's text message in my mind. Try not to eat anything that doesn't agree with you, LOL. The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. I'd nearly suffocated in front of them, been rushed to the hospital, and his response was to make a joke about it. It was like he was already rewriting the narrative, turning my medical emergency into another funny family story about dramatic Emma and her overreactions. The silence from the rest of them was almost worse than David's text. Monica hadn't reached out at all. Jake hadn't even bothered to ask if I was okay. Sarah had called once, a brief, awkward conversation where she asked if I needed groceries, and then quickly changed the subject when I tried to talk about what had happened at the barbecue. By the third day, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. I wasn't going to Monica's birthday dinner. For the first time in my adult life, I was going to say no to a family obligation without offering an elaborate excuse or apology. I wasn't going to claim I was sick or busy with work. I was simply not going to show up to be their entertainment for the evening. I sent a simple text to the family group chat. Won't be able to make it to Monica's birthday dinner. Have a nice time. The response was immediate. My phone started buzzing with messages. David, what do you mean you can't make it? It's family. Monica, Emma, sweetie, I really hope you're not still upset about the misunderstanding at the barbecue. We're all just glad you're feeling better. Sarah, honey, Monica's really looking forward to seeing you. Can't you just stop by for a little while? Jake, let me guess, another mysterious illness? Tears of joy. I stared at the messages, feeling that familiar pressure to give in, to explain myself, to make everyone else comfortable even at my own expense. But something had fundamentally shifted in that hospital room. I could have died, and their biggest concern was whether I'd still be available to play my role as the family punching bag. I turned off my phone and didn't turn it back on for the rest of the day. The week that followed was unlike any I'd experienced since moving out of my parents' house. Without the constant undercurrent of family drama and the anxiety of wondering when the next gathering would be, when the next criticism would come, I found myself with an abundance of mental energy I'd forgotten I could have. I threw myself back into work with a focus I hadn't felt in months. The marketing campaign I'd been struggling with suddenly seemed manageable. I volunteered to take on extra projects, stayed late to perfect presentations, and found myself actually enjoying the creative challenges of my job for the first time in years. My supervisor, Jennifer, noticed the change immediately. Emma, whatever you're doing differently, keep it up, she said during our weekly check-in. Your work has been exceptional lately. There's a real energy and confidence in your presentations that wasn't there before. Outside of work, I started doing things I'd neglected for years. I signed up for a pottery class at the community center on Colfax Avenue. I started cooking again. Real cooking, not just the simple dishes I could throw together quickly between family obligations. I even began going to yoga classes at a studio in Cherry Creek, something I'd always wanted to try but never felt I had time for. The pottery class turned out to be exactly what I needed. There was something deeply satisfying about working with clay, about creating something beautiful with my own hands. The instructor, a woman named Carmen in her 60s with silver-streaked hair and paint-stained fingers, had a calm presence that reminded me of Dr. Martinez. Clay doesn't lie, Carmen told our small class during the second session. It responds to exactly the energy you put into it. If you're tense, it fights back. If you're gentle but confident, it shapes itself to your vision. I thought about that as I worked, my hands covered in wet clay, shaping a simple bowl on the wheel. For so many years, I'd been tense, always braced for the next criticism, the next joke at my expense. But here, in this quiet studio, with people who barely knew me, I felt my shoulders relax for the first time in years. Meanwhile, my phone continued to buzz with messages from my family. The tone shifted over the weeks from confusion to irritation to outright anger. Monica left a voicemail. Emma, I don't know what's gotten into you lately, but this silent treatment is really immature. We're worried about you, and frankly, you're making things uncomfortable for everyone else. David's messages became increasingly demanding. Answer your phone. This attitude of yours needs to stop. Family is family, and you don't get to just disappear because your feelings got hurt. Even Sarah, usually the most passive member of our family, started pressuring me. Emma, please just call me back. Monica thinks you're having some kind of breakdown, and David is getting really frustrated. Can't you just apologize and move on? Apologize. For nearly dying. For having a medical emergency. For expecting basic human decency from the people who were supposed to love me. The request was so absurd it would have been funny if it wasn't so heartbreaking. But the most telling response came from Jake, in a message he sent to our family group chat that I'm sure he thought I wouldn't see. Maybe if we just ignore her long enough, she'll get tired of the drama and come back to normal. She always does this kind of thing when she wants attention. This kind of thing. As if having a severe allergic reaction was part of some pattern of attention-seeking behavior. As if nearly dying was just another one of my dramatic episodes. Reading that message was like having ice water thrown over me. It crystallized something I'd been trying not to see. They genuinely believed that everything I did, every emotion I expressed, every moment of vulnerability or need was calculated manipulation designed to make them uncomfortable. They weren't just dismissive or insensitive. They had constructed an entire narrative about who I was that made it impossible for them to see me as a real person with legitimate feelings and needs. In their story, I was the dramatic one, the sensitive one, the one who always made things about myself. And as long as I kept showing up, kept playing that role, kept accepting their treatment, and coming back for more, I was confirming their version of events. That night, I sat in my apartment with my pottery bowl, lopsided and imperfect, but genuinely mine, and made a decision that would have terrified the old Emma. I wasn't just going to skip a few family events. I was going to build a completely different life, one where I wasn't constantly performing for people who saw me as their entertainment. But first, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. I needed to document their behavior, to see the patterns clearly, so I could never again doubt my own perceptions of what was happening. I opened my laptop and started typing. Every incident I could remember, every cutting comment disguised as concern, every time they'd dismissed my feelings or made me the butt of their jokes. The document grew longer and longer as memories surfaced. Years of small cruelties and large indifferences that I'd somehow convinced myself were normal. By the time I finished writing, the sun was coming up over the Denver skyline, and I had 12 pages of documentation. 12 pages of evidence that this wasn't about me being too sensitive or dramatic. This was about me finally seeing the truth of who they really were. 3 months after my hospital stay, I was living a life I barely recognized, and for the first time in years, I actually liked the person I was becoming. Without the constant drain of family drama, I had energy I'd forgotten existed. Energy to pursue things that actually mattered to me. To build relationships with people who saw me as more than a punchline. My pottery classes had become the highlight of my week. Carmen, our instructor, had taken a special interest in my work, and I'd progressed from wobbly bowls to elegant vases that actually looked intentional. More importantly, the other students in the class had become genuine friends, people who knew me as Emma, the marketing professional, who made beautiful ceramics, not Emma, the family scapegoat. "You should consider selling these," said Marcus, a graphic designer in his 30s who'd become my closest friend in the class. He was holding up a glazed serving platter I'd finished the week before, its deep blue surface catching the light from the studio windows. "I'm serious, Em. This is professional quality work." The idea had been floating around in my head for weeks. Several classmates had asked if I'd make pieces for them, offering to pay. Carmen had mentioned that the studio hosted a small artist market every few months, and she'd been encouraging me to participate. "I don't know," I said, though even as the words left my mouth, I could feel the excitement building. "I mean, I've only been doing this for a few months." "So what?" Marcus grinned. "You're talented, and you love it. That's more than most people can say about anything in their lives." That conversation stayed with me through the rest of the week. At my day job, I found myself sketching pottery designs in the margins of meeting notes. During lunch breaks, I researched small business licenses and craft fair applications. The idea of creating something beautiful and having people value it enough to pay for it felt revolutionary after years of being told I was too dramatic, too sensitive, too much of everything. Meanwhile, my family's attempts to pull me back into their orbit were becoming more desperate and revealing. The messages had evolved from confusion to anger to manipulation, and now they were trying a new tactic, recruiting other family members to intervene. My cousin Lisa, Monica's daughter who lived in Portland and rarely came to family gatherings, called me on a Tuesday evening. We'd never been particularly close, but she was one of the few relatives who hadn't actively participated in the years of mockery. "Hey, Emma," she said, her voice careful and diplomatic. "I hope you don't mind me calling. Mom asked me to reach out because she's really worried about you." I almost laughed at the irony. Monica, who had spent years making cutting remarks about my weight, my job, my relationships, was now worried about me because I'd stopped showing up to be her verbal punching bag. "I'm doing really well, actually," I told Lisa honestly. "Better than I have in years." "That's great to hear," Lisa said, though I could tell she was following a script Monica had given her. "It's just, Mom says you've been completely cutting everyone out, and she's concerned that you might be having some kind of mental health crisis. She mentioned something about you being hospitalized." The way she said it, some kind of mental health crisis, told me exactly how Monica had spun the story. No mention of the severe allergic reaction, the near-death experience, the complete dismissal of my medical emergency. Just Emma having another dramatic breakdown. "Lisa, did Monica tell you what actually happened at that barbecue?" I asked. There was a pause. "She said you had some kind of anxiety attack because you were stressed about helping with cleanup." And there it was. Monica had completely rewritten history, turning my life-threatening allergic reaction into a mental health episode triggered by chores. It was so breathtakingly dishonest that I almost admired the creativity of it. I spent the next 10 minutes explaining to Lisa what had really happened. The allergic reaction, the ambulance, Dr. Martinez's warnings about how close I'd come to dying. I could hear the shock in her voice as I described their reaction to my medical emergency. "Emma, I had no idea," she said quietly. "Mom made it sound like you were just overreacting to normal family teasing." "Normal family teasing," I repeated. "Lisa, they turned my allergic reaction into a trivia game at the next family gathering. They gave out a prize, a gift card to a barbecue restaurant, to whoever could best mock what happened to me." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long, I thought the call had dropped. When Lisa finally spoke, her voice was different. Harder. More direct. "That's fucked up, Emma. That's genuinely cruel." Hearing someone from my own family validate my experience was like having a weight lifted from my chest that I didn't even realize I'd been carrying. For so long, I'd wondered if maybe I was overreacting, if maybe their treatment of me really was just normal family dynamics that I was too sensitive to handle. "I'm not cutting everyone out," I told Lisa. "I'm just not volunteering to be their entertainment anymore." After we hung up, I felt something shift inside me, not just the relief of being understood, but a growing sense of my own power. For years, I'd accepted their version of events because I didn't have the confidence to trust my own perceptions. But now, with Lisa's shocked reaction confirming what I'd known all along, I felt a clarity I'd never experienced before. I wasn't the problem. I had never been the problem. The next morning, I walked into my supervisor Jennifer's office and asked if we could discuss the possibility of me taking on more creative projects. The marketing firm had been talking about expanding into event coordination, and I'd been thinking about how my pottery and artistic interests might translate into that world. "Actually, Emma, I'm glad you brought this up," Jennifer said, leaning back in her chair with a smile. "We've been incredibly impressed with your work lately. There's a confidence and creativity in your campaigns that we haven't seen before." I was just talking to the partners about possibly creating a new position, creative marketing coordinator, and your name was the first one that came up. The position came with a significant raise and would involve coordinating events, working with local artisans and vendors, and developing marketing campaigns that told compelling stories. It was everything I'd been unconsciously preparing for through my pottery classes and the personal growth I'd been doing over the past few months. "There would be some travel involved," Jennifer continued. "Trade shows, vendor meetings, maybe some weekend events. Would that be a problem?" I almost laughed at the question. A few months ago, I would have immediately worried about how my family would react to me being less available for their gatherings. Now the idea of having a legitimate reason to be unavailable for their toxic dynamics felt like a gift. "That sounds perfect," I said. That evening, I called Carmen and asked about participating in the upcoming artist market. She was thrilled and immediately began helping me plan which pieces to display and how to price them. Marcus offered to help me design business cards and a simple website. Suddenly, I had a support system of people who believed in me, who wanted to see me succeed. For the first time in my adult life, I was building something that belonged entirely to me. My family couldn't mock it or minimize it or turn it into a joke because they didn't even know about it. They were still operating from their old playbook, trying to manipulate and control someone who no longer existed. The Emma they knew, the one who absorbed their criticism, who bent over backward to earn their approval, who prioritized their comfort over her own well-being, was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who had learned the difference between family and people who actually cared about her. But I wasn't ready to reveal this new version of myself to them yet. First, I wanted to build my life so solidly, so completely, that nothing they said or did could shake the foundation I was creating. And then, when I was ready, I would show them exactly who I had become. 6 months after my hospital stay, I was living a life I couldn't have imagined a year earlier. My promotion to creative marketing coordinator had opened doors I didn't even know existed. I was traveling to craft fairs and vendor shows across Colorado, building relationships with local artists and small business owners. My own pottery had become a legitimate side business. I'd sold over 30 pieces at the studio's artist market and had a waiting list of customers for custom work. But the most significant change wasn't professional or creative. It was the quiet confidence that had settled into my bones. I walked differently, spoke up in meetings, made decisions without second-guessing myself into paralysis. People at work had started coming to me for advice on projects. Carmen had asked me to assistant teach a beginner pottery class. I was becoming the person I'd always had the potential to be, once I'd stopped trying to earn approval from people who were determined not to give it. My family, meanwhile, had gone through several phases in their attempts to pull me back into their orbit. After the manipulation tactics failed, Lisa had actually started defending me in family conversations, which apparently caused quite a stir. They'd moved into what I recognized as the love-bombing phase. Suddenly, after months of angry demands and guilt trips, I was receiving texts full of fake sweetness. Monica sent me links to pottery workshops. Since I knew you were interested in crafts, David forwarded job postings. That might be good opportunities for you. Sarah sent photos of family gatherings with messages like, "Everyone asks about you. We miss having you here." The transparent manipulation would have been laughable if it wasn't so revealing of how little they actually knew me. The pottery workshops Monica sent were beginner classes and techniques I'd mastered months ago. David's job suggestions were all entry-level positions that paid less than my current salary. And Sarah's photos showed the same gatherings where I'd spent years being the target of their jokes, now presented as warm family memories I was supposedly missing out on. I didn't respond to any of it. My silence had become a power I'd never known I possessed. But then, in early November, Sarah called me directly. Not a text, not a voicemail, but an actual phone call that I answered on impulse during my lunch break. "Emma, honey, I hope I'm not bothering you at work," she said, her voice carrying that particular mixture of nervousness and forced cheer that meant she was about to ask for something. "What's up, Mom?" I asked, genuinely curious about what could have prompted a direct call after months of unsuccessful texting campaigns. "Well, you know David's been working so hard lately, and with his birthday coming up in December, I thought it would be nice to throw him a surprise party. Something really special, you know. He's turning 55, and Monica thinks we should make it a big celebration." Of course Monica was involved. I waited for the real ask. "The thing is," Sarah continued, "we want to hold it at that beautiful event space downtown. You know, the grand ballroom at the Oxford Hotel? It's expensive, but David's been so stressed with work, and I think he deserves something elegant." I almost smiled at the transparent setup. The Oxford Hotel was one of Denver's most prestigious venues, the kind of place my family had always talked about but never actually been able to afford. They were clearly hoping I'd offer to help pay for it, now that they'd heard, through the family grapevine, that I'd gotten a promotion and raise. "That sounds lovely, Mom," I said neutrally. "Yes, well, the thing is..." Sarah's voice became even more strained. "It's quite costly, and we're trying to figure out how to make the numbers work." Monica suggested that maybe family members could contribute, to make it really special for David. There it was. After months of treating me like I was having a mental breakdown for setting boundaries, after allowing David to make jokes about my near-death experience, after turning my medical emergency into family entertainment, they wanted me to help fund his birthday party. The audacity was breathtaking. "When were you thinking of having it?" I asked, an idea beginning to form in my mind. "December 15th. It's a Saturday. Monica's handling all the planning, of course. She's so good at these things. We're hoping for around 60 people, maybe 70 if we can fit everyone. December 15th. I made a mental note as pieces began clicking into place in my head. "Emma," Sarah's voice was hopeful, would you be able to help with the costs? I know things have been a little strained lately, but this is family, and it would mean so much to David." I almost laughed at the phrasing. Things have been a little strained. as if my near-death experience and their complete dismissal of it was just a minor family disagreement. "Let me think about it," I said. "Can you send me the details? The venue, the date, what kind of event Monica's planning?" "Oh, Emma, that's wonderful! I'll have Monica call you with all the information. She'll be so excited that you're wanting to be involved again." After we hung up, I sat in my car outside the downtown restaurant, where I'd been meeting with a potential vendor, staring out at the Denver skyline while my mind raced. They wanted me to pay for a party where I'd inevitably be treated as their entertainment again, where David would make jokes about my dramatic episodes, where Monica would find ways to cut me down while pretending to be concerned about my well-being. But what if I turned their own tactics against them? What if I used their party, their venue, their audience, to finally tell the truth about what had happened? Not in anger, not in a dramatic confrontation, but in the same calm, factual way Dr. Martinez had delivered my diagnosis in the hospital. I thought about the document I'd written months ago, cataloging their behavior. I thought about the medical records I still had, the allergy test results that confirmed how serious my reaction had been. I thought about all the witnesses who would be at this party, relatives, family friends, David's coworkers, people who had heard their version of events, but never mine. For the first time in months, I felt genuinely excited about attending a family gathering. That evening, I called Monica directly. She answered on the first ring, her voice practically vibrating with satisfaction. "Emma, Sarah told me the wonderful news. I'm so glad you want to be part of David's celebration. I was worried that you'd been, well, you know how you've been lately." "I've been great, actually," I said calmly, "but I'd love to help with David's party. Tell me about your plans." For the next 20 minutes, Monica laid out her vision in excruciating detail. A cocktail reception, a sit-down dinner, speeches during dessert. She'd invited David's colleagues, old family friends, relatives from out of state. It was clearly designed to be the social event of the year for their circle, a chance for Monica to play the gracious hostess and for the family to present their perfect, close-knit image to the world. "We're planning to have speeches during dessert," Monica said. "You know, just family members sharing memories and funny stories about David. Nothing too formal, but heartfelt." "That sounds perfect," I said, meaning it in a way she couldn't possibly understand. "I'd love to contribute to the cost and maybe say a few words during the speeches." "Oh, Emma, that would be wonderful. I know exactly what you mean. Some of those funny family stories we're always telling. People love hearing about our family dynamics." "Yes," I agreed. "Our family dynamics are definitely something people should hear about." After we finalized the details and I agreed to contribute a significant amount toward the venue costs, I hung up and opened my laptop. It was time to prepare for the performance of a lifetime. But unlike every other family gathering I'd attended, this time I would be the one controlling the narrative. This time, I would be the one with the microphone, the captive audience, and the truth they'd spent months trying to bury. December 15th couldn't come fast enough. December 15th arrived with the kind of crisp, clear Colorado evening that made Denver's skyline sparkle like diamonds. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, adjusting the elegant black dress I'd bought specifically for this occasion. Not because Monica had specified cocktail attire, but because I wanted to look like the confident, successful woman I'd become. The Emma who would walk into that ballroom tonight was nothing like the woman who'd collapsed at a family barbecue 6 months ago. In my purse, carefully folded, were copies of my medical records from the hospital stay. Dr. Martinez's notes, the allergy test results, the documentation of how close I'd come to dying, while my family accused me of being dramatic. I'd also printed out screenshots of the family group chat messages, including Jake's dismissive comments about my episodes and David's LOL text about my near-death experience. I wasn't going to ambush them with anger or emotion. I was going to do something much more powerful. I was going to tell the truth, calmly and factually, in front of everyone they'd been performing for all these years. The grand ballroom at the Oxford Hotel was even more impressive than I'd imagined. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over elegantly dressed tables, and Monica had clearly spared no expense on the floral arrangements and decorations. About 70 people were mingling during the cocktail hour, Family members I recognized, David's coworkers, old family friends, and several people I didn't know but who were clearly part of their social circle. Monica swept toward me the moment I entered, resplendent in a burgundy gown that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "Emma, you look absolutely beautiful. I'm so glad you're here. David's going to be so surprised when he arrives." She air-kissed my cheeks with the theatrical affection she always performed in public, and I smiled back with genuine warmth. Tonight, her performance was actually helping me. "The venue is gorgeous, Monica. You've outdone yourself." "Well, when it's for family, nothing's too good," she said, loud enough for nearby guests to hear her generous sentiment. "Come on, let me introduce you to some of David's colleagues. They've heard so much about our close family." For the next hour, I mingled gracefully, making conversation with David's coworkers and acquaintances. I talked about my job, my pottery business, my recent travels for work. Several people mentioned how proud my family must be of my success, and I smiled and thanked them while noting how Monica's expression tightened slightly each time someone complimented me. Jake was there with a date I didn't recognize, holding court near the bar with his usual collection of inappropriate jokes and loud laughter. Sarah fluttered around the edges of conversations, clearly nervous about the surprise, but pleased with how elegant the evening was. When David finally arrived, his shock and delight at the gathered crowd was genuine, and for a moment I could see why Sarah loved him despite his flaws. Dinner was served without incident. I sat at the family table, making pleasant conversation and carefully eating only the foods I'd confirmed were safe with the catering staff. Monica had made a point of loudly asking if I needed special accommodations for my dietary restrictions, clearly hoping to draw attention to what she still saw as my dramatic food issues. I'd simply smiled and said the menu looked wonderful. But as dessert was being served and Monica stood to begin the speech portion of the evening, I felt my heartbeat quicken. Not with panic this time, but with anticipation. I was about to reclaim my narrative after years of letting them write it for me. Monica's speech was exactly what I'd expected, a syrupy tribute to David's work ethic, his devotion to family, his wonderful sense of humor. She talked about how blessed they all were to be part of such a close, loving family that could laugh together through anything. Jake spoke next, sharing a rambling story about David teaching him to drive that somehow became an excuse to mention how Emma used to panic in cars and other childhood anxieties that had supposedly been so dramatic, but so funny. The audience laughed politely, not realizing they were witnessing a decades-old pattern of public humiliation disguised as affectionate family teasing. Then it was my turn. I stood slowly, taking the wireless microphone Monica handed me with a confident smile. The ballroom quieted as 70 people turned their attention to me, expecting another warm family tribute filled with funny anecdotes about the birthday boy. "Thank you all for being here tonight," I began, my voice clear and steady. "It means so much to David to see how many people care about him, and it means a lot to our family to share this celebration with you." I paused, looking around the room at faces that were already starting to sense this wasn't going to be the speech they expected. "I want to tell you about something that happened to our family 6 months ago, something that taught me a lot about who we really are when the chips are down." I saw Monica's smile falter slightly, but she couldn't interrupt without causing a scene in front of all these important guests. In June, at a family barbecue, I had a severe allergic reaction. My airway began to close, my blood pressure dropped dangerously low, and I collapsed. The paramedics who responded said I was in anaphylactic shock, and the emergency room doctor later told my family that if help had arrived even 10 minutes later, I might not have survived. The room was completely silent now. I could see David's colleagues leaning forward, concerned expressions replacing their earlier festive smiles. "But here's what I want you to know about my family," I continued, my voice remaining calm and measured. "When I was gasping for breath and begging for help, they told me I was being dramatic. When I collapsed against the wall, unable to breathe, they accused me of faking it to get out of doing dishes. Even as the paramedics were putting me on a stretcher, some members of my family were still telling each other that I was probably just working myself up over nothing." The silence in the room was deafening. I could see shock and horror on the faces of the guests who didn't know our family's dynamics, the ones who had been charmed by Monica's gracious hostess act and David's jovial personality. At the next family gathering, I continued. They turned my near-death experience into a trivia game. They literally gave out prizes to relatives who could come up with the best jokes about my allergic reaction. The winner received a gift card to a barbecue restaurant. A few people gasped audibly. I saw one of David's coworkers look at him with undisguised disgust. "I have the medical records here," I said, pulling the folded papers from my purse. Dr. Martinez's notes, the allergy test results, documentation of exactly how serious this was. I also have screenshots of text messages, including one from David sent the day after I was discharged from the hospital. He wrote, "Try not to eat anything that doesn't agree with you. LOL." I held up my phone, showing the screenshot to the nearest table of guests, watching their expressions change from confusion to horror. For months after this happened, when I tried to set boundaries and protect myself from further cruelty, they told people I was having a mental health crisis. They rewrote the story, claiming I'd had an anxiety attack over household chores, not a life-threatening allergic reaction. Monica finally found her voice, standing up with a forced laugh. "Emma, I think maybe this isn't the time or place." "Actually, Monica," I said, my voice cutting through her interruption with quiet authority, "I think this is exactly the time and place. You've spent years performing for these people, showing them what a warm, loving family we are. I think they deserve to know the truth about what happens when the cameras aren't rolling." I turned back to the stunned audience. "I'm not telling you this for sympathy, or to ruin David's birthday. I'm telling you because for too long, I let them control the narrative about who I was and what I deserved. I let them convince me that their cruelty was normal, that my pain was entertainment, that my need for basic human decency was unreasonable." I set the microphone back on its stand and picked up my purse. "David, happy 55th birthday. I hope you have many more years to reflect on the kind of man you've chosen to be, and the kind of family you've chosen to enable." I walked calmly toward the ballroom exit, my heels clicking confidently on the polished floor. Behind me, I could hear the explosion of shocked conversation. Monica's desperate attempts to control the damage, David's angry voice trying to regain command of the situation. But I was already gone, stepping out into the crisp December night with a lightness in my chest I'd never felt before. I wasn't running away this time. I was walking toward the life I'd built for myself, the one where I was valued and respected and loved for who I actually was. My phone started buzzing immediately, angry texts, desperate voicemails, frantic messages from relatives who'd heard what happened secondhand. But for the first time in my life, their reactions didn't matter to me. I turned off my phone and drove home to my apartment, where my latest pottery creation sat drying on the windowsill, and my business cards for Emma's Artisan Ceramics were stacked neatly on my desk. Tomorrow, I had a craft fair in Boulder and dinner plans with Marcus and Carmen. I had a full, rich life that belonged entirely to me, built with people who saw my worth instead of people who denied it. And while my family would probably never understand what they'd lost when they chose cruelty over compassion, I finally understood what I'd gained when I chose myself over their approval. The truth, as it turned out, really had set me free.